Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I wanted to share a little bit about why we wanted to present, this story to begin with. We find that a lot of people are struggling with exactly this, and even the early responses in the interest or what excites you most about this webinar, the registrant said, I have a hard time with hiring tech talent. I want to see tips. I'm really, really struggling with this, and the market is just crazy. So it really highlights the, I think, importance of addressing a story like this. To give you a little bit of background, I work at G2I, and G2I is a small niche company where we vet developers in the JavaScript ecosystem only. And we help companies like UITV and others find really talented pools of developers on an ongoing basis. So we wanted to showcase this story. UITV came to us many years ago and said, hey, we're struggling with this thing. And so this story is going to be presented in a pretty casual Q&A style. I'll ask Jason a question. Jason will have a chance to respond. And we're really hoping to hit a lot of key points throughout this. And you'll also have a chance to ask questions, pointed questions for us at the end if you have them. Jason, I'll let you do a little quick introduction about yourself and UITV.
For sure. Thanks, Lily. Yep. So hi, I'm Jason. My background is as a developer. I've been a product manager, stepped across a lot of different industries. Most recently, I've been working as a vice president of solutions, which was a head of a professional services organization. And most recently, I've been working as a CTO and also as a consultant and a coach with different industries and different companies around all matters technical and growth. And excellent adventure at UI, and I'm happy to relate it. And I'm just excited today to be able to put a blazer on and smile and say hi to a crowd of people.
I know, it's not often, right? There's not often an occasion to dress up with the way things have been going. I have a collared shirt, so I don't know if anyone can see it, but it's definitely there. Great, so I'll just jump right in and say, right now, the world in the way that it's shaped, and with the pandemic especially accentuating this, every organization has become a tech organization to some degree. Even if the industry that they're in is not a tech background or they're not a tech company, a lot of products, the way that they're built, the way that they have to exist, has to be built on a strong foundation of technical talent. So, people say like, oh, this issue doesn't concern me. Chances are you're going to come across this. Chances are you're going to come to a place where you're dealing with a company that is looking for technical talent, and they're going to very quickly realize that it's difficult. It's difficult in today's market. The data is showing that 63% of senior executives surveyed say that they consider the tech talent shortage a key concern for their organization. And then 86% of hiring professionals say that it's challenging to find and hire technical talent. That's the majority of people, right? So 86% is a pretty whopping number. The question is, what do you do given all this? How can you navigate this market and still come out ahead and feel like you're able to get the best people to work for you? We're going to go right into a poll, and you should have a poll pop up in your question. The poll is just to get a sense of the audience. How do you describe your primary function? I know there are a lot of folks on today's webinar, so go ahead and select your option: recruiter, people ops, hiring manager, employee experience / benefits, executive, or other. Give everyone a second to answer that. You should see it on your screen now. And then as the results come in, I think they'll pop up and we'll see them. But I'll continue, sort of with the presentation. Oh, here it is. So 30% in the recruiting, people ops at 23%, hiring managers 10%, employee experience / benefits at 3%, executive at 13%, and other at 20%. That's interesting. Okay, so let's move on here. Oops. Clearly, as I've mentioned, according to the data, according to anecdotal experiences that people have, the tech hiring scene is really heating up. Qualified candidates now, we find, have much more choice than they did before. And so recruiting and HR departments, I think, are faced with this increasingly escalating challenge. Where can you find the best technical talent? How do you compete for that talent in this superheated market? And what strategies can you actually employ to augment local hiring or, diversify your talent base as well? So let's get into it. Jason, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first question. Also, give us a little bit of your experience specifically with this at UITV. So what exactly your struggle was, right? So how did the actual tech talent shortage that we're talking about today impact UI specifically?
Yeah, it's pervasive across any types of companies. I mean, the specific vertical we were in, UITV was a media company. And we were responsible from a technology side of enabling media companies to get their content and their applications across a whole host of different devices. So think Apple TVs and set-top boxes, PS4s, Xboxes, phones, tablets. So we were in a very specific industry. We found ourselves, in a situation, if there's any Ottawa people here, we were in hyper growth mode for quite a while, during that journey. And, from my standpoint, I was managing the professional services arm. The other side to the company was more of the core R&D, engineering of the main technology. And from a professional services standpoint, and again, this is generic to all businesses, but for us, we'd be signing contracts, and in order to get revenue in, we needed to hire people to be billable. So, it was a challenge. I think that, Ottawa is similar to many other cities, that there's a competitive tech market here. And even though our technologies were somewhat generic in the sense C++ or React Native to get specific, there were some nuances to it that made hiring a lot more difficult as far as who we needed, how they fit. So, it became a scale gate. It becomes a business gate. And, it becomes one of the most important problems in a scaling company, to find the people to actually get the revenue in. And I draw a straight line between those two things. So I think that we had some challenges, and we certainly were in a competitive situation in our city. So, it's a common problem across all verticals in all cities, not just media and Canada and Ottawa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned that this is pervasive in other places, whether you're in Ottawa, Silicon Valley. What specific challenges did you find in the Ottawa area, in your specific geographical area?
Well, Ottawa, just to set up the perspective for the people not in Canada, it's a metro area of about 1 million people. I think we can all point to cities around the world that have tech communities within them that are about that size. And a lot of the situations in Ottawa are similar to some other cities, and some are unique to us. Some of the more common ones, I mean, we have some really large companies in Ottawa, really large tech companies that are here. We have one long-term unicorn in Shopify here that, is growing at an incredible clip and has done so for the last 10 years. We have a government organization here in Ottawa that's quite large, being the capital of Canada. And it's a different environment, but also, that's part of the story of why people move here and where people want to work. And if you look a little bit broader across Ontario and Canada, pretty much every major tech company in the world has a presence here. Well-known names, Netflix, Google, there's an Adobe office in Ottawa, SurveyMonkey. We've got so many different companies, too many to shout out. So if I've omitted any company that's a big one from somebody that's attending, it's not intentional, but it's incredibly competitive, and a lot of engineers are going to work for these different companies. So those are sort of the concerns within Ottawa. I think that, beyond government, it's not just tech companies competing for this type of talent, right? You've got all sorts of other functions that other groups are looking for. You've also got people in Ottawa working remote in other locales across North America and the world, and that's becoming more of a trend as well. And I can, I've got stories of, people that left my organizations to go work in the government or to go work with other companies. And, as good as you make the culture, as good as you make your retention trends in a company, there's always going to be those pressures. And I think, it becomes easy if I'm Google and I can just point to, my high end of the band in salaries and all the benefits and the name a recognition of that. But for a lot of the rest of us, we are not in a FANG company or a multi-billion-dollar unicorn company. We're competing with other startups, we're competing with other institutions, and it's not easy and it's quite difficult. And that's part of what we can get into here.
Yeah, absolutely. If only we were all Googles and we could just be attractive right off the bat to the best, to the best talent in the world, and just go about our days. But I think, unfortunately, that's not the case for most people. And that's where, all of us come in. Next poll question we have for everyone is, what benefits do you think that technical recruits value most highly? This is a question that we, talk about a lot, because a lot of people are like, well, how do I get the right person? Do I make my work more exciting? Do I really present it and say, hey, this is really an impactful project that we're working on? Is it professional development that they're looking for? Is it really the compensation and benefits package? Flexibility, right? Wanting to work remotely forever, or wanting to work remotely for part of their time, or wanting, something in between. So I think there's a lot that goes into what makes it attractive, and we'd love to hear the audience's answers to this. So let's see. Oh, wow, that was quick. So it looks like challenging, exciting work and projects is taking the brunt of the response here at 41%. And then after that, it looks like the second highest is compensation benefits package, which I think is definitely a big one. And then flexibility, professional development, and then other. So that's sort of the response breakdown. So, with that, I'll ask you, Jason, I have some thoughts on this. I know you have some thoughts on this. What do developers look for, right? The big question, the $1 million question.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what's shown in the poll, where, the answer is sort of yes. All of those things help.
And more.
and more, absolutely. But I think, my approach, and I guess this is the first time I can broach this, but I think that, scale and hiring is something that is connected to so many other things in a company. I speak as a functional leader, but it speaks to so much about the processes and the culture and the training and everything else that happens in the company. So, the points I'd like to take up is that, we can all say it's meaningful work or projects. I think that, every company has a great story to tell, a great narrative to tell about their vertical or where they're working, how they're doing it, why the work's important. Obviously, the founders and leaders in that company believe in why they're doing it. And sometimes the challenge is communicating that message out, especially in an age where the signal is, facing so much noise. But I think, yeah, meaningful work and projects is a big one. But going to the next level, I think that, one topic that I've spent a lot of time on with my colleagues in HR teams and recruiters is around professional development. And, recently I've been in one book called An Everyone Culture, where it's talking about some of these dynamics around, it's not just, is the work challenging? You're looking to retain these employees over the long term. It's not just bringing them in to hire. And I think that, if you can offer an environment where, for instance, people are not staying in the same job for a long time if they're comfortable doing it. And again, I understand how hard that is sometimes, especially if you're not facing a growth scenario. But what does that look like culturally in the company? Can you communicate that to people that are potentially you're advertising to come in and work for you? Are you looking at, or are you equipped with ways to make the job and your culture appealing to all sorts of different types of people, right? Are you looking at younger developers? Are you looking at the finished product only? Do you have strategies for developing that talent? I mean, the one great story I like to tell around development is the story of how Marissa Mayer at Google ramped up the associate product manager program, where, as I recall, the anecdote is that, she bet another one of the leaders at Google that she could hire younger, out of school people to serve this function and train them and mold them into what she needed faster than the other leader could find the finished product in a fit that was perfect for Google. And I think that telling that story of how that journey will happen for those people is a really important point as far as attracting talent. What will it look for them? What does the next 5 years look like? What's in it for them? And it's beyond just what tech they're working on. It's beyond just what's there. What's the team look like? What opportunities could they be afforded? What history can you tell them? Comp and benefits are a big one, and we can never avoid that. And I think that it's forcing a lot of companies to be creative as far as not being able to compete with the same bands or the same compensation structures. I think that often benefits are quite commoditized. There's different ways to kind of speak about that, but a lot of them are the same. So the platform for trying to innovate and get creative is around those things, and it has to do with the story you're telling to those folks. And I think finally, flexibility in space and work arrangements, I think, is a big thing coming out of COVID, is that suddenly we were all in the office, and suddenly we were not. And hopefully soon, if I knock on wood, we'll be back in the office. And what story can you tell around that? What would appeal to an engineer? Is it working at home? Is it flexibility? There's a lot of talk in the literature I read, in my role, and also in a lot of HR and other areas around what hybrid's going to look like, what other companies are doing, and we're all trying to figure it out. So I think that space and work arrangements and communicating that flexibility and how you actually are going to cater to what actually makes those people productive is an important thing as well that has to be acknowledged. So, in my view, there's no silver bullet, but the story and narrative has to be compelling. And, if you feel you're not comfortable with that story right now, then look back into the organization and ask those questions of how you actually work in your culture, in your development strategies already, so you can then tell that story to external candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's not like a quick fix thing, right? Looking back inward to make sure that you have really interesting work, that you have a flexible environment that accepts people from different backgrounds with different opinions. And, that's a lot, right? So that might mean a culture shift. That might mean having leadership be on board with these things. And then, with the compensation benefits, that's also a tough one, right? Like if you don't have it, it can't materialize out of nowhere. So unfortunately, I think it's a lot of different pieces that go into this. As companies are competing more and more, they're getting really creative about it. So you sort of have to always be, keeping up to some degree. Yeah. Let's go to our next question. What strategies and approaches did you consider at UI TV as the hiring market was, heating up?
Yeah, and I mean, that was happening at the same time that our growth needs were heating up. It was good timing. So yeah. I think that, and you have to realize the context of what we're looking at when we start this process, right? Is that we've got a company that is primarily located in the same building, a great building, but, in our own office space. Tons of our processes are primarily physical, right? We are tracking project progress on stickies, on scrum boards, we called them. People are used to meeting in person. And this is kind of before a lot of the video tools took off, even recently before COVID. So this is not just a hiring concern; it becomes a cultural concern, right? Because we first start looking within Ottawa. We started off in a fairly niche technology, and I won't get too deep into that, but we were working in C++ in a technology that typically wasn't used in the context, a language that wasn't used in the context we were using it in, which made us somewhat appealing in terms of why we were using it. So we had some success with that within Ottawa. And then we pivoted technologies to a technology that was primarily React Native based in the JavaScript universe. And, suddenly found ourselves in a much more competitive market. Multiple other companies, even in Ottawa, are using that, and they're pretty cool too. And we're in a very competitive market. So we're in that landscape where we're primarily in Ottawa. We're all in the same building. We're using these two technologies, and we're starting to grow from a business standpoint. And so we first started to look at offshore / nearshore augmentation of our teams. Many of those initial engagements were with partners that were the preferred partners of the clients we were working with, especially from the pro services standpoint. Yeah, we work with these guys all the time, work together, it's going to be great, no problem. I think that that had mixed results, to be quite honest. I think that, it's tough to suddenly change teams so that we're working across 4 time zones for a team that's primarily worked in a physical space. If the processes for bringing those partners on aren't fully developed yet, then the team starts to wonder, well, who are these people? Are they qualified? Are they going to affect my accountabilities? And you get a lot of interesting dynamics you have to navigate through. So we went through that. So we did the remote hiring. We completed those projects and reflect on them. We also looked at local options rather than always hiring full-time. Let's look at contract options with different agencies, specifically within Ottawa. And we had pretty good success with a few of them in terms of them understanding our DNA over time and what would work with us. Obviously, that's more costly, but you make that trade-off because you still have to grow. So we did that augmentation of local staff. We did the remote, I'll try it, the remote trials with a lot of teams across the globe. And, from there, we started to investigate, what actually worked for us, right? And I'll get into that a bit later, but we started to investigate, well, what actually would work for us? We can't just blindly select any partner. We can't just pull in anybody. And we also have to examine what our internal processes are. Are we using the right tools? Are we positioning this the right way? And how are we going to stay productive? Because to the client of ours, we have to be just as productive as we were before, or they're not going to want to pay us for what we're doing. So it really forces some innovative thinking pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a little bit about hiring remotely. Can you tell me a little bit more about the challenges of, like opening like overseas offices and things like that?
Yeah, well, this is where the teamwork aspect of everyone in the company is involved with hiring, HR, and the functional managers working as a team. And this is a team sport, right? So in this context, it's really easy for me as a functional executive to wave my arms and say, okay, we need to hire across the globe. I'd love a branch office if we can, put together a plausible business case. We'd like to open an office in Europe. I think we need something in APAC, maybe South America, and let's go. Like, let's hire a presence. We'll get a building. We can get some salespeople in there too, and we can start pulling people in. And then, but the reality is, it's really, really complicated. You have to trust your friends in HR. You have to trust everybody in recruiting. It is really complicated, and ultimately, the equation just doesn't work out. That for various regulatory reasons, for cost reasons, you can't do that, or it just doesn't work. Obviously, for a very large company, there's a global presence, and that makes it a little bit easier. But for a small startup that's trying to grow, that just can't happen. So that we got past that fairly quickly, and I think that, we didn't go for it, right? A lot of talk about that, but we ultimately didn't go for opening global offices. I think that, the problem still remained though, right? That we needed to source talent from a global standpoint. We needed to still, we could still honor the fact that we wanted to be an Ottawa company and proud of that. And I think, that continues, but we needed to be realistic in terms of how we could actually reach our growth needs. And, we needed to go globally and figure that out pretty quickly. So be great to open an office, but just not in the cards. And that's where, the partnership really worked out, where I was like, Jason, it's not quite that simple. Please hear us out as far as, what it's actually going to cost us to move into those cities.
Yeah, and just even from a logistics point of view, right? I think a lot of companies,
Mm-hmm.
if you're saying, oh, great, we want to expand our access to the talent pool, the global talent pool, let's just open an office in every major city in the world, easy peasy, right? But I think the reality for a lot of companies is that they don't have the budget, or, to pull something like that off, I think would be a lot more complex than a lot of people imagine. And so sadly, often it's not an easy option to go that route. All right, so I'll ask you, how did you ultimately tap the global group of developers without opening offices in all the places?
Well, selecting all the places you'd like the holiday and then trying to advocate for offices.
I know,
there.
Yeah. All the warm destinations, we keep getting a lot of bids for all those offices. I don't know why.
Yeah, that didn't work. I tried that. No. So what we ended up doing is, so think about this. If we talk about the story to date, right, we've had all these conversations internally. We've tried working with external partners, usually ones that were brought by other entities into the deal, into the engagement with us. And, I remember the conversation in my office in the whiteboard where I sat down with a few folks, and we had to think through what's actually going to work for us in a partner. What is actually going to be the case? And again, one of my other favorite words is trust. And how do we get to a point where we can truly trust as a partner? We're both getting something out of this, an international or global company that can get us access to these developers. And we decided on a few things, right? We'd noticed that sometimes at scale, the goals of the company you're working with as a source of talent, whether it's an outsourcing company or a separate services company, you can start off with your business goals very aligned, but they may have bigger ambitions, right? They may actually not be able to make a business case in their own company unless they have 50 or 60 developers working with you. And it can start great at the beginning, but once every party starts to realize that 50 or 60 developers are not coming out of this relationship, then it gets a little awkward. We have to understand where we can get talent we can trust. And that becomes a collaboration with screening as far as, working with a separate company to say, this is what we're looking for. Over time, this is what works for us. These are the crucial details. We're flexible otherwise, but they need this, and making sure that understanding can happen. But what we ultimately did was find, it ended up being a smaller group of companies to work with as partners, that we could find alignment with our business goals, that they, were able to collaborate and trust us too. And we could actually communicate what we needed. The nuance, as I said earlier, around the technology was crucial. And we finally reached that understanding. So it was with a smaller group of companies. That gave us flexibility. The contracts gave us flexibility. This trust and communication was key because, there's so many cases where we talk to larger companies and say, okay, yeah, we do C++, we do React Native, no problem. We've got, there's 30 people sitting behind me, they're ready to go. And you want to stop the conversation there and go, it's kind of like that, but there's this nuance is actually the most important part. And if I don't feel you're listening to me as far as how that's going to go and the tech we need help in, then this isn't going to work. And, I'm going to be on the hook for the business goals I'm trying to hit. So, that trust was huge. The communication was huge, and really sitting down and understanding that there's a range of companies to work with. And we really had to zero in after some experiences on what would actually work for us and be very realistic and specific with what that was going to be.
Yeah, and I think there's pros and cons to some of the contract side work, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things also that we hear that people like is the ability to not have everyone be full-time, have a sort of changing needs met with the supply that you can sort of adjust up and down. Obviously, if you have 10 full-time employees, you can't say, hey, just kidding, we don't need you for the next 3 weeks. Like, go take an unpaid vacation in one of our warm offices we just happened to open. So I think for the next question, I'm going to ask you, how many developers do you think should be full-time, part-time, augmented? And in your specific work case scenario at UITV, did you find that you had this ebb and flow that you had to sort of adjust, and it was actually kind of a perk?
Yeah, well, this is one of those things where it depends on your business, and every business is different. But I can talk about some of the parameters we were looking at, and some of them are fairly universal. But I think we were in a services organization, and anyone in a professional services company knows that work can ebb and flow. Right, you get fluctuations in your backlog of work. You have to manage that fluctuation. At the same time, figure out how you can maintain that core group, how you can maintain that trusted group of full-time employees that are contributing so much to the culture. And what ended up happening was that we had to try to find that balance. We were still weighted towards finding excellent full-time hires. Obviously, Ottawa is great, but what ended up happening over time is that we had I think we netted out at about 60-40 full-time versus external in various sources in our organization. And, that was a KPI we were tracking very closely. Our awesome, shout out to Russ, our awesome resource manager, tracked this on a daily basis as far as, what our composition was, what it looked like. We didn't want to get too high as far as our contract percentage. We didn't want to get too low. And what ended up happening is you could be realistic with the partners to say, look, we're a services business, our work fluctuates. We're going to structure our contracts in a way that you will flex with our work while we maintain our core group, especially to maintain trust within your internal organization, which is another huge thing. So we tracked it about that, but it was really also trying to balance, there's a lot of pressure sometimes for investors to have the value of your people there. What I mean by that is investors want you to be scaling full-time employees. It's great to have a ton of contractors working with you through a strategy kind of like this, but your board and your investors may actually be going, well, no, we're expecting you to grow a company and the value is in your people. And so how are you maintaining that? So that's why that balance is so important, that to try to maintain those parameters like culture, like your core team, as part of the company, while still engaging with a more flexible group of people that helps you scale. And sometimes, and this is what I mean when I said earlier that sometimes these recruiting and scale concerns go all the way back into your technology and the code bases in your company. So for instance, your architecture and your tooling for your engineers may not actually work for people that are outside of your home office, or there may be parts of your software that you can't give to somebody in a different country because of IP concerns. It's like the core part of your entire existence is that piece of code. And to sort of explain to everybody you're about to hand that over to a partner that maybe you haven't worked with a long time, that's super important too. And that's a consideration that has to be made. That may limit how many external contractors you can bring in. And, and for all of those reasons, and there's probably many more in other businesses, many are similar to those, but you have to look at your own business and decide what actually works from a business perspective in terms of how fast can scale go, how fast can we bring people in, and what should that percentage ultimately be? It's something that's sustainable, that meets our business goals as well, because we're all, for the most part, in a capitalist industry, and we're trying to make profit. So can't lose sight of those things. So it's a tough question and it's a tough situation, but I think that with that kind of examination and thought process around what you're trying to do, you can get somewhere fairly quickly.
Yeah, and it sounds like you hit the right balance with 60. It sounds like 60% were full-time and then 40% were part-time, so that you can sort of, have that mix of folks working on different things with different levels of security, and, because there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to development. So oftentimes it's not just one human being that can pull it all off, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Our next poll question is, how many technical hires do you plan to make this year? So go ahead and answer that on your screen now. The options are 10 or less, 11 to 50, 51 to 100, or 101 and more. I think, Jason, you and I were talking about how there was a company that had a goal of hiring 2021. Which company was it that you were referring to?
That's Shopify. It was all over the
Shopify.
media at the end of last year. So 2021 wow. Engineers in 2021. So that's
wow. Okay.
That's aggressive.
That's really aggressive and a little scary to think about, to be honest. Okay, so let me see if we can get the results. 10 or less. Okay, it looks like the majority of people are not hiring 2021. Shocking, I know. It seems like most people are probably not at Shopify, I'll assume. 10 or less is the 60% of the response. 11 to 50 developers, 10. 51 to 100, 2 people said that. 101 and more, none. That's fascinating. So, I'm assuming for the folks that answered in the higher ranges that the company is probably larger and there's just more need for that. Okay, we're going to go to the next question. What were the particular challenges of managing contract or part-time hires for you?
Yeah, again, there's a lot of nuance in here for us to talk about. I think that first of all, it's finding the talent, right? How do you get access to a global workforce? How do you understand where these pockets of people are? What does it actually look like? And that's why having trusted partners you can actually work with to help you, that know the regions, that know the people, it always helps to have that human connection. Vetting becomes really, really difficult remotely if you aren't set up to do that. You're used to talking to people across a table. We could talk a little bit about tactics and vetting and things like that a bit later, but it puts a lot of pressure on your vetting strategies. If you've been used to one thing and suddenly you're forced to navigate potential language barriers, you want to find the best talent. You don't want to accidentally or have not hire the right person because you weren't set up to handle some of the circumstances. So there's also some of the employment laws is just trying to make sure from a legal perspective. And again, this is where I had to really lean on, my colleagues in HR and otherwise in terms of what the agreements needed to look like, what are appropriate day rates for different regions. All of those concerns are fairly huge as well. And it's a challenge. And then, assuming you hire people, you've got them signed to a contract and they come in to work in the building. it's a rare company, if not impossible, that could just have, you know, external folks drop into a team that's already been functioning for quite a while and have them, you know, run immediately as fast as they could. So, you know, and not have tension, frankly, between different members of the group saying, you know, why is this person here? I don't understand, you know. Um, and I think that, you know, that's fairly key as well in terms of, and this speaks into how we hire and again, the vetting, but making sure the teams as much as possible are involved in what you're doing. It's not an imposition from the management team. This is something we're collaborating with another company with. They're being brought in. We're all having a voice in terms of how we're going to work with them, who we're going to hire and why. Other people start to feel skin in the game saying, okay, this isn't, you know, this isn't something that's been imposed on us. This is something we've actually worked with the team on. We know it's the best thing to reach our goal. We're all on the same page and we have to work on it together. That helps to start. And then it's a lot of pressure on your management team, especially team leads and first line managers within tech companies, to change their processes, change how they work, you know, both from a standpoint of how do you check on people remotely? How do you know if they're having problems? You know, some folks won't tell you if they're having a problem remotely, which is why it's so key to make sure those communication lines are open. And, you know, managing that trust is so key. You know, do you have a contact on the other side that can help you with these things? Thinking about how you might handle a performance issue. There's always those things that crop up, whether it's a full-time local hire or somebody from another country. So having an idea of what those challenges might be in terms of how your company will actually react to what's happening. You know, and then finally, it's making sure that the vendor and the partner themselves understand all of this too, that this is how we want to work. This is how it's looking for us. This is what screening looks like. You know, because this comes back to the trust and how you pick a good partner. But some companies will have a back and forth with you saying, well, we've already placed one developer with you. We guarantee these next 5 people are going to be perfect for your company. Just, you know, why are we wasting time having these screening calls and why are you interviewing them again? And I think, you know, with the partner with trust, they'll realize that, okay, the stakes are pretty big with this. And understanding it's a collaboration. Yeah, there's, you know, we are still going to want to talk to them. We're still going to want to interview. We're still going to want to make sure that we're hiring the right person, even after we've hired 20 as a remote contractor. You know, and it ends up improving the broader scheme, right? So the good news is the silver lining is that, you know, all of these changes that you force your teams and your system to undergo in order to accommodate this level of growth actually helps the broader system. It helps people that are local work better within your systems. It helps your managers be better. It helps your organizations be more resilient anyway, even though there's a lot of cost to ramping these things up beyond just hiring the person and managing payroll and those sorts of things. So that's the broader story as far as, you know, our challenges with that. But the good news is, as long as you are, you know, keeping close tabs as a management team, you're understanding what's working, you're staying close with your teams, you can iterate and get better over time. And with patience, that's a good thing. But this is a universal scale problem. What if you bring in 40 people this year? What is it actually going to look like, and how are you going to manage that? And that's, you know, these are considerations that are universal to any company that's undergoing growth right now, not just ones looking, you know, internationally for development talent.
One of the points you mentioned, I think we all over the last year got more experience with, which is the remote aspect, right? Like, how do you manage someone that's not in right there, or, you know, face to face? If they have issues, are they telling you about issues? So I think at the very least, we've all gotten a taste of that, whether we liked it or not, or wanted to or not. We all got a taste of that through this last year of having to, you know, figure out how to communicate, figuring out how to trust someone and really be able to work together, even though we're not in the same location for X amount of hours. So at the very least, I think some of those skills are transferable to this. If you're hiring a contractor and they're located somewhere else, it's similar to having an employee that is not in the office every day, that you have to, you know, improve your communication skills and just be really, really smart about it. Let's go to the next question. I know that you talked a little bit about HR and UITV and gave some shout outs, but what do you think, what is the relationship between engineering and HR at UITV, or what was it when you were there? And where do you think HR can really add value in the technical hiring process?
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously we can't expect HR to be experts in like every single tech stack of like knowing the ins and outs. It's just not realistic because they're not hiring usually just engineers. They're hiring across the board for the company.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I mean, so much respect for me in terms of having to span all of those different roles and to feel you have to be technical enough to manage this stuff yourself as an HR professional. And I was lucky enough at UI to have, an incredible HR and recruiting team working with me for the entire time. And, whether I shout out everybody, I probably can't. There's like, if there's anyone attending here, but I was super lucky with that. And what didn't happen was, throwing resumes over a fence and, having an engineering team that kind of was quasi interested in if the right profiles were coming across, it got a little adversarial. We all worked together. I mean, one key thing, as far as working with recruiting in HR is we had a hiring guild. We had a group of people that involved, all the way down to, individual contributors within the engineering team that were interested in this sort of thing, helping evaluate how we were doing with interviews, with screening, with vetting, changing tactics, experimenting with different things, working with in the guild, working with the recruiters, working with HR staff to make sure that we're all on the same page what we're doing. It's a collaboration. And it has to be, especially if you're adapting this fast for other things, hiring from another country, moving remote. So I was lucky enough, and again, a huge shout out. And I unfortunately can't see any of these people and thank them, but we were so lucky that we had a really close team at UI, and we all worked really well together. And we were able to work on these things, on an ongoing basis and not feel that any group was separated, that, HR was out on an island and, they didn't have the technical context to try to do the initial screening, or, nobody was listening once the initial screen came in. Engineering always felt supported in terms of the back and forth around candidate screening up into negotiation and actual hire. So, this was a huge thing. And I think that, through the guild, through this process, this teamwork, we were able to, make sure that we weren't falling into some of the common traps around screening, right? Which is, hiring teams that look like you or sound like you or have the same background as you. Not getting trapped in the culture fit trap, which is, often, an unfortunate sort of catch-all for reasons that you might or might not hire a person. And to have that support with compensation and offers and to be able to understand what was realistic and what wasn't. So that was huge. And that teamwork and that cross discipline interaction was absolutely the most important part of all of this. And this stretches all the way into onboarding, right? It's not just a hiring guild. It's what happens that day they walk in. What does the experience look like? Do they have a partner? We always had a buddy system where somebody coming in, remote or not, would always have a buddy. Once you get enough remote people, you can buddy remote with remote, and they can relate their own specific circumstances and experiences to each other. So that was fairly huge, and we required all of us. I think that, it's very complementary, and HR has to offer that knowledge of the industry and, the human element and regulatory and all of these pieces that as a functional manager, I might be blind to as I wave my arms and ask for things. So I think that it's absolutely complementary, and it was easy at UI, fortunately, because of the quality of people we had in those roles.
Yeah. Were they open also to the contract, experience? I think sometimes people say like, well, hold on, this is not a full-time hire. How much of the responsibility falls on me versus like you as the person running the project? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that becomes a deep topic anyway, around how you structure your teams, because what you end up with is a situation where you might have, very strong people leadership and very direct coaching and managerial relationships happening with your full-time employees. But who's giving that feedback to the remote people, especially if they're with a third-party company? Are the managers supposed to be hands-off? We had a few different roles at UI. We had coaches that spanned a lot of different projects, and we had project people that were managing the deliverables of their particular project. Where does that work? Are you forcing unusual responsibilities on the people that shouldn't be managing that? How do the accountabilities work? So, I mean, that's a huge thing too, as far as how you structure the organization. And that's a conversation that has to be had in terms of working together with HR and everyone else to figure out what will actually work, and how do we make sure that these people aren't off on a limb somewhere, that they're getting the same level of feedback and feedback, and I want to say coaching, but I know as well, this is another example that, especially in Canada, by directly managing or coaching someone, you can sometimes imply a employment status that you don't want to imply for the purposes of accounting and in the books. So, there's a lot of things like that HR is crucial in helping us, navigate, that I may not be aware of, and probably am not. And just make sure that everyone's got the right level of support, and HR is key in underpinning that as well.
Absolutely. I know you mentioned the vetting piece being a big one, like screening people. And again, you can't expect people in HR to know the ins and outs of like very niche technical vetting processes, especially when you're talking about a specific technology, right? So what do you think is the best way for them to address the vetting technical talent piece of it, right? Vetting as a topic, I think alone is like, you have to stay on top of it. You can't, it has to be updated. And even if you create like one set of guidelines 5 years ago, guess what? It's no longer relevant because maybe the technology has changed, or, there's so many things that can go wrong.
Yeah. And I think that, the trends change too, right? The trend a few years ago was trying to mimic Google and other companies and doing, especially for engineers and developers, very specific whiteboard exercises that were fairly esoteric and maybe not necessarily connected to what you're actually doing in the business technically. I'm not a fan of those personally. I think that, there's other trends as far as spending entire days with a company, and there's downsides to doing that sort of thing as well, especially if people are remote. It's easy if they're in town, but it's not easy if they're not. And I think it's, back to the teamwork piece, right? That, it should be complementary. I think that you're interviewing for so many different things. Technical knowledge is part of it. And certainly the engineering team has to be engaged in that. They also have to be engaged in being able to articulate the patterns that they're looking for out in resumes, in the marketplace, what it looks like, helping HR and recruiting pattern match. You can't expect anybody to be, to read minds or to just magically understand what the perfect match is going to be. It takes work, and it takes a lot of conversation to get everybody on the same page. But skill-specific and coding challenges are important. There's, take-home exercises are interesting. Of course, you never want to cross the line into implying that you're getting people or candidates to do, quote, unpaid work for your business. So don't hand them the thorniest problem you're looking at within one of your teams. Explain it carefully, what's happening, but also look at other aspects of it, right? Look at, how coachable are they? How, what do they look like potentially under pressure? How are they going to communicate? Just like reference checking and all those other pieces. So I think technical vetting is a big one. I think that, in my past lives, it's always been that engineering had to take responsibility for the bulk of saying, yes, that person technically can work with our teams, but the checks and balances have to be there too, right? And HR has to be there to, look for different pieces to say, is this person really coachable? And the broader piece to this is that it doesn't matter that initial decision you make on what your process should look like. The most important thing to me is, as an executive, is how are you changing, and how are you monitoring results, and how are you changing in response to that? And that's why a construct like a guild or a committee, if you want to be more exciting with the name, is monitoring what's happening and making proposals for changing it as you go along. And even if you don't start perfectly, if you have a process like that in a group of people that are actually responsible and accountable to what's happening, then the right things will happen over time, and it will change into something better. And that's all you can hope for in the end, as opposed to getting it perfect at the beginning.
We all know there's nothing more exciting than a committee, so I'm glad you mentioned that. I did want to mention a small anecdote that is related to this. At some point I talked with one of our engineers at G2I, and he was saying he got employed with a new business, and he was one of the first engineering hires that they made. And he was like, yeah, the process was a bit wonky, but they brought me on board. They seemed to be excited about it. And then after a week of him being on board, they wanted to hire another person. And they were like, okay, I guess you're now in charge of the technical vetting, since you're the person technically who is the most qualified to do this. And he was just very overwhelmed by that. He's like, you know, in my first week of being on this job, all of a sudden they were like, well, now you have to do this and ask these questions and come up with this process. He was like, I don't have a hiring background at all. And all of a sudden I was sort of thrown to the wolves very quickly. But this is what ends up happening because, you know, asking for a code challenge, asking or being able to evaluate it, not everyone can do that, right? And so the average HR person doesn't, you know, and I think reasonably so, doesn't have the training to evaluate a code challenge and know what questions to ask on a more specific level. My next question is, where do you think HR professionals should look to augment their own capabilities when it comes to things like technical vetting and these very specific things? Like, should they get trained up? Should they be, you know, should they go and learn how to code? I feel like that's probably not the answer. I hope you don't say that they should do that for the sake of everyone on the call.
People's jobs are hard enough already, especially as I said earlier, they're spanning disciplines and responsible for so much, and so much happens during the day for all of us. But I think that there are partners out there. There are people out there. You know, you do get into situations where, again, you hire a junior engineer and they're the only one there as your company is embarking on a transition, and suddenly there is literally no choice but to get them involved in interviewing. That's a bit tough, but I think that you know, there are a lot of organizations that provide these types of things. There are, you know, folks you can find that can help with this stuff, at least to get it bootstrapped and to give that reassurance that's needed. And also finding partners that, you know, have some of this vetting capability that can say, okay, here's the dossier, here's what the person's doing, here's what it looks like. We've done thousands of these. You know, if you feel you have that level of trust, then that can be helpful as well. You know, but there's all sorts of, and this is back to hiring part-time and other types of things as well, is either look to a partner that offers that capability, that offers that screening. And it's not just like, here's 15 resumes, go to town. It's like, no, we're going to work with you on a relationship basis to say, we're going to work with you. We're going to be that arm. We're going to try to help you screen. That can help a lot. But it's also finding that expertise, right? That's another reason why you might look to part-time, which is, you know, for instance, I need a data science person. I don't know how to do that. There are people out there that can help with that strategy to offer a little bit of expertise and to get you going. So there's lots of ways to do that. And, you know, I think that, you know, it's crucial to be able to reach that market. But I think the reassuring part is there are people that can help. There are different partners that can help, and there are folks that can help with that as well, especially for companies undergoing a transition. And, you know, look through local bodies, local networking areas, you know, and look around where the buzz is. If you know the technology area you generally need, who's staffing these things, what does it look like? Networking helps a lot too, but, you know, don't feel you need to go back and get an engineering degree to screen talent. There's lots of help out there. And the good news is, as you know, lots of people across the globe are working better together, there's lots of other people that can help you with that. So
I think a lot of people probably just breathed a collective sigh of relief. I don't have to become an engineer to be able to do this properly. Tell me a little bit about what you look for in a staffing partner, right? And at UITV specifically, what you guys were looking for in a staffing partner, because this is the sort of the direction that you guys ended up going in. So what things should people look for?
Well, for us, it was trying to understand and articulate, as I said earlier, what those important things are to you. Every business is different. Every scale need is different, and try to articulate who would work best with you. You know, and again, who can you trust and why? And, you know, how do you align your goals? And that's super important as well. It's looking for, you know, as I said, last question, a lot of comprehensive services, not just, you know, again, here's 15 candidates, here's the resume. We did a keyword search on the thing you asked us for. You know, if you're getting results that you could have done with a Google search or, you know, just an ad somewhere, then, you know, is that the value you're looking for? I think that, you know, in support with the vetting, right? Being able to be honest with what your limitations are as an organization and hear, okay, yeah, we can help with that and it's going to be okay. I think that's the main thing as well. But again, it all comes back to trust, and that happens over time. And it has to do with how you align your business goals and how the communication works out over time. And, you know, you have to be able to sit down and articulate those things in order to build the trust later and to select the right partner. So.
Absolutely. Well, those are all the questions I have for you, but I know that someone just put a question to the Q&A, so you're not quite off the hook yet. I'm actually not able to see it. I tried to click the function, so we're going to flip flip the tables, and Jason, you can ask the question and then also maybe answer it.
Okay, for sure I can do that. No, it's a question around, and thanks, Danielle. It's a question around when hiring or promoting from within, what aptitude qualities do you look for when considering a person who might not meet all of the skill knowledge points, but they want growth? So no one's ever perfect for a promotion, right? It's just like hiring
Hey,
to a
speak
certain
for
extent.
yourself. Speak for yourself, Jason.
I think here's what I look for, and it has to do, I look for these in interviews as well, but it comes down to notions that are a little bit intangible, but I look for two things and they're somewhat related. The first is, how coachable are they? If you're getting feedback from their managers, if you're getting feedback with how they're operating, how coachable are they? And that relates to the second point, which is how do they receive feedback? I'm not looking for what they're doing right now. I'm looking for how is their arc going to be in the future. So 6 months from now, in a series of high pressure situations, what is it going to look like? Obviously, communication skills, but no one is born a manager. No one is born, in these roles that are more senior. They have to develop into them. So I find myself always looking for, what is that arc going to look like, and how do they how can they learn, right? Are they teachable? If that can happen and you feel you have the processes to give them those skills, to make sure, for instance, the one transition that's the favorite one is moving someone from an individual contributor role into a managerial role. None of us come out as natural leaders, much as sometimes, we all think we were. We aren't, and it takes a lot of support. It takes a lot of development to do that. So, if you want to move people at a pace that I'm advocating for, you have to take some chances and be able to take considered risks. And if your feedback mechanisms are in place, you're being honest with each other, and it's someone that's a candidate that you feel can take that feedback and improve and be supported, then that's okay. You'll be fine. They'll develop, and by some for some reason that doesn't work out, well, the feedback mechanism will ensure that you are able to keep tabs on that and you understand how that arc is going. So again, coachability, coachability and trust and how they handle feedback. The other stuff, you have those results as fairly quantifiable. I think you understand what a top performer looks like. I think my final warning here is there's often a tendency I see where you take your best performer or your best performing, highest valued individual contributor and make them a line manager or move them up. But you really have to be careful in terms of thinking through the business and understanding, move them, give them more responsibility, but understand the work they do best. And there's more than one path of advancement, which is something that, we work closely with HR at UI on. There are many ways to advance in your career and making sure that people are always in the job that will fit the business and fit them the best. So I think that's the only thing too, is don't take your best hockey player, because I'm in Ottawa, don't take your best hockey player and put them behind the bench as a coach necessarily, right? Does that help your business or does it not? Is there something else they can do that help amplify their impact on the business? So that's the final kind of heads up I give. But yeah, it's
and applicable, I think, applicable to not just engineering hires, right? Like overall. And to harken back to the story that you had about the Google experiment, I think she won, right? So she was able to find someone who's junior, train them faster than they were able, that the competitive person was supposed to find someone off the street to fit the role, right? So that just, I think, proves the point of, trainability, response to feedback, etc. I do want to go into the next slide quickly, just to talk a little bit about G2I. So, no secret, we pair incredible companies with world-class developers. We do vetting ourselves. We do assessments through real-world standards. We don't do whiteboarding. We are focused specifically on the JavaScript ecosystem, which is a small subset of developers. We don't vet them all across the board. We find that because we're in a niche, we're able to have technical challenges that are more unique, more specific to the technology that we're actually assessing someone for. And so we work with React Native, and Node specifically. We did, provide UITV many developers that hopefully you guys enjoyed working with, and develop this relationship of trust, right? You mentioned trust a lot. And we find that companies do trust our transparent technical assessments. We give them the code challenges and say, hey, if you want to have someone evaluate this, we have recordings of their interviews and things like that. And you can figure out if you like the person before you hire them. And we only pass the top 1% of applicants that come through our doors, which I think it speaks to the fact that you're probably going to get the creme de la creme of developers. So I'll leave it off and say thank you. As a special offer to everyone on the webinar, we will reach out to you asking if you'd like a free consultation with someone at G2I to talk about your hiring needs. And there's no obligation. You could just say, hey, you know, these are the challenges we're having. Maybe we're the answer, maybe we're not. Maybe it's not the type of developer that you're looking for. But if it is, we'd be happy to give you advice on how to navigate that process. You can reach out to either one of us. If you have a chance to take a screenshot, you can get Jason's email or my email, reach out to us. If you had a question that you didn't get a chance to ask, shoot them over our way. I think either of us will be happy to provide any thoughts we have. And other than that, we just want to say thanks so much for coming on the webinar. We're right at the top of the hour. And so this has been hopefully useful for you guys. And I know I enjoyed it. So thank you so much, Jason, for taking the time to sign on and answer all my questions.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.